Okay, hi guys. Boy, let me tell you what a week this has been, and it ain't over yet. I don't know if I'll get into my personal details, but hey, if somebody pops up a comment, I guess I might just throw something in. Okay, so here I be, and I am out of location in the wonderful area of Ellicottville, New York. If you haven't been here, come here sometime. They have normally it's a place that people in the area like to go skiing. A lot of people in Canada come down to Ellicottville. Now it's a kind of a small hill. I think the elevation is like 700 feet, but the slopes are great. The way they run this place is fantastic, and the same observation extends to the rest of the town. It's a very interesting place to come and visit. So right now, yes, I'm giving a plug for Ellicottville, New York, of all places. Okay, so that said, um, there's so many things. I did start by talking about the media again. Um, the basic point, and I've made it before, and I'm going to make it again, is that you have two forces at play, one that insists on stasis, and the other which insists on changing. So, this is like the old saying about an immovable object meeting an irresistible force. Yeah, I'd say that's a fair description. And in this case, the immovable object are all those people in the, yes, liberal media who insist on making the same points over and over again, using the same talking points, the same lines, the same arguments, the same claims, and they don't really seem to listen to the new information over here, where you have more arguments, new facts, new data, and they don't want to engage that. Maybe later they will, but there is this drumbeat that just keeps going and going and going. So I guess it's something that certain people need to hear over and over again. I guess kind of like sometimes I'm repeating myself. But in their case, it's this constant reinforcement of claims which just don't have any basis. And when factual information is presented, we're not interested. When new factual information is presented, we're just not interested. So, okay, I guess this will go on, but the real problem, in my opinion, is that yes, as I've just suggested with the title here, these people who would consider themselves to be a part of the media really do end up being rather confused, okay, because they do not have the ability to stop, weigh, compare. They can deny, they can divert, they can deflect, but they have not added anything substantial to the argument, whatever the subject happens to be, whether it's climate change, the economy, what Trump is doing, Iran, healthcare, Medicare fraud, doesn't matter. Election fraud, they'll just always, it's like, yes, like especially, right? With election fraud, they keep talking about how we're election deniers. And there's the evidence. So here's a weird one, for example, that I came across. I can't believe this. In any event, I guess this was disclosed recently. There was a case, a hacker who pulled out something like 630,000 voters' information, and what handed it to somebody, modified it in some fashion. It's not entirely clear, but what he did was clearly illegal. And on top of that, the person who did this admitted to doing it. So he admitted that he broke the law. In spite of that, we have four prosecutors who refused to take this on as a case. And mind you, these four prosecutors um, covered the period of 2021 to 2023. After the fourth prosecutor, the then Department of Justice said, we give up. That said, closed cases can always be reopened. So we certainly hope that this is another one that will get some much deserved attention. So yeah, and the other part, it's just the way I like to approach this, I guess. Let me talk once again because I live in Connecticut, happen to be in New York State this evening, but with Connecticut, we've had a liberal media that has also been a lapdog media for the longest time. And they have not really done anything to challenge the existing administration, not for 2 terms. So why would we expect them to do it soon? Well, the answer is they're not. Okay. For what it's worth, I wish I could put some of these things up, but I get these X posts and different memes and comments and flyers and such that point to a lot of hot issues. I'll pick one. The most recent one is this Ms. Ramirez. Okay, and I'm going to give a shout out to Reese Hopkins, because so he's he's a radio personality on WTIC. The number I'm trying to remember, 660 FM. I'm not sure. In any event, Reese Hopkins has been doing a fabulous job of staying on the case here with respect to this matter involving this woman who killed 2 police officers in a drunken accident. She was 2 times over the alcohol limit, and again, I get them confused. She tested positive for cannabis. I believe that was the case, not cocaine. And there has been no real response, but we've had our erstwhile Secretary of State, Stephanie Thomas, of all people. Lady, you are the Secretary of State. This is a law enforcement case. Why are you stepping into the middle of a law enforcement case? Well, it's because she was an illegal alien, and the question that Ms. Ramirez may have voted illegally. And it's very puzzling why Ms. Thomas would do this, only because it's just one case, okay? It's not our finding, say, hundreds, thousands, tens of thousands of names of illegal aliens who had gotten driver's licenses and also ended up on the voter rolls. No, we have just one case. And there might be a couple others out there. The problem for Ms. Thomas seems to be that she has to deep six to be done. And, it's here's the tempting thought. Here's the tempting thought. At any moment, some other piece of information could come across, and this throws this whole thing in a completely different perspective. But don't expect the media in the state of Connecticut to deal with this in any system, in any factual way, professional way. That's certainly my conviction. All right, so also I do have to mention this person. He's a columnist. His name is Dan Haar. I've talked about him in the past before, Haar, and he seems to be the go-to guy. I mean, if there's anybody in Connecticut that we would call a, quote, deep state journalist, Dan Haar would qualify, because he's willing to spin and mischaracterize issues in a way that, well, let's say it, pleases the state. Pleases the state. If that's what he's expected to do, then he does it. And he's acted very strangely in the past with some other articles that he's written. I'm tempted to think of him as sort of a clown show in some respects. I mean, if he was a clever journalist and wrote in a way that was engaging and would say well thought out, I'd say so. I tend to be opinionated about those things. And he is none of that. None of that. That's unfortunate. So where does that leave me in terms of the other things? It would be nice. This is just me dreaming, but I mean, it would be great to devote some resources to a more in-depth and detailed analysis of how these different publications roll. So whether it's the Hartford Courant, Republican American, New Haven Register, New London Day, the Stanford Advocate, Norwalk Hour. There's the New Haven Independent. You have to consider them. There's the Connecticut Mirror, Connecticut Examiner. I think I've hit most of the big ones there. Let's see, there's Bridgeport Post. I guess you can put them in there too. All right, so all these guys, if one had the time to line them up one after another and to look at how they handle certain issues. Now, I need to point out the obvious. If you take Greenwich Time and the Stanford Advocate, I think it's the Norwalk Hour and a couple others. They're owned by the same paper, and what they do is they'll take the exact same articles in each of these publications and present them, but they'll just put them in different places. Instead of page 1, there'll be page 3 or whatever, at the top of the front page, bottom of the front page, whatever it is they deem worth doing. So obviously that's their way of saving money. That's how they stay in business. But in exchange for that, ladies and gentlemen, let's face it, the liberal media produces an inferior product. It is intellectually inferior. It's inferior in terms of its news content. It would be very interesting to have a conversation with the people who run these papers, talk to the editors, and just what is their thinking about how they regard their audience? Okay, do they regard them as college educated? Do they mostly blue collar and you have to write a certain way? Do they write to a certain grade level? Do they avoid certain words? Do they have a template or a narrative that they try to work by? Because Rush Limbaugh made that point all the time, and it certainly bore up in terms of the national media. So the sense is that there remains, well, I'm going to take some responsibility for this. There remains no serious challenge to these liberal publications. They are absolutely dominant. In terms of circulation. They're absolutely dominant with respect to the viewership on their websites and any media they may do out there. And we, the conservative media, have been chip papers. And there's at least 30 of them, but a ton of the community newspapers in this state are owned by one company, just one. That would be Hearst Media. So, and I can tell you in my interactions with people from Hearst Media, oh yeah, they're liberal, all right. It comes right across the phone when you're talking, tone of voice and their whole, that NPR way of talking. Oh my God, I can't stand it. But they do it. So yeah, we've got a host of challenges here. I mean, so people who care about media, care about news, yes. So anyway, get back to the Financial Times point, is what they showed is that if you were to take two towns, one that has a community newspaper and the other that really doesn't have much of anything, certainly nothing that's, quote, local, and considers the information that's put in front of them. You have others, then I'm going to reserve 40%. Okay, so you have another 40%, 20 each, okay, Republican and Democrat, who will vote for their party no matter what. So it doesn't even matter if they get any information on an issue. That 20% ain't going nowhere. Okay, so that's 55%. Now we got to deal with the other 45%. Of the other 45, well, the 20 and the 20, they're going to be in the category of low information voter. And there's a challenge to reach them. Okay, I want to make a note about the low information voter in a minute. So we're left now with 45%. And would I call them persuadable? Not as many as it seems. Okay, but within that 45%, I'm going to say that, all right, first of all, just to say it, it's still 40% of the voting population in Connecticut that is unaffiliated, also confusedly referred to as independent. There's actually an independent party, which is completely different and a much smaller number than those people who just look at the whole idea and don't want to be a Democrat. Well, it's several things. It's I don't want to be a Democrat and I don't want to be a Republican, or I am fed up with being a Democrat and I'm fed up with being a Republican. A pox on both houses. I'm becoming an unaffiliated voter. And that is the major composition of the unaffiliated voter base, in my opinion. Yes, there'll be some other segment that does not really, has never identified with either party. I'll just tell you, my older son, when he was being given the opportunity to decide which party he wanted to belong to, he said, no thanks, I'm unaffiliated. I don't want to have anything to do with that stuff. So he makes his father proud, even though he's a Republican. And yes, you're going to have a group of people who are like that. So where does that leave you? Where does that leave our confused media in terms of how you're going to appeal to the public? Yes, all they're going to do is pound their line. And yes, sometimes they pretend to be objective. They'll put up pro and con. They'll have their token conservative columnist in many of these papers. But, here, you know what? While I'm talking, I'm going to do something a little bit strange. Let's see if I can get this. And I'll give you an example here. See if I can pull this up. Maybe. There you go. Okay. So I'll just read a couple titles. The Democrat male midlife crisis. Murphy, that would be our Senator Murphy, who is of some questionable value because he does cheer for the Iranians against the Americans, chasing the far left to stay young. But at what cost? Let's see here. And amid growing bans, Beacon Falls sees data center as a way to put itself on the map. Well, okay, some towns are for that. Let's see. What's this now? Looking for some other things. Trump administration proposes Head Start rules rollback affecting 5,000 Connecticut families. That is something that deserves a closer look. Let's see here. See, New York ruling could put Connecticut's law targeting mass ICE agents in legal jeopardy. How do you like that? The vulture capital. Inside private equities take over Hartford, Connecticut. That's pretty funny. Then Protos, yes, our lovely Connecticut GOP chairman, Protos strategic advantage. Unopposed Connecticut candidates have received $207,000 in taxpayer election money so far. Yeah, I just, I don't want to go there. This is about media and not about these jokers. All right. Let's see. Progressives to test Connecticut in Democrat primaries. That's understating it. Former Connecticut House leaders blast LA, say he's character assassination. Detracts from issues, but he's just doing his standard playbook stuff with this guy. If he wants to go after Governor Lamont, and you're going to do it the same old-fashioned way, be my guest that you're only polling at 20% in your party. Hey, what am I going to do about it? And conflict of interest. Yeah. So, all right. So, for example, Elliott has attacked Lamont for having conflict of interest in investing in Connecticut data centers, but that may not be true. Right. Yes. And Murphy calls for economic populism. So, I should do a special thing sometime on economic populism. I think it's a good idea. There is this, populism goes back to McKinley and who was the guy who ran against? I can't believe I can't remember his name. But in any event, I'm getting carried away here. But trying to hold the line. There's another point here to consider. I want you to think about the lack of information about what the unions in this state do when it comes to politics speaks loudly, and it's a fact that we need to pay attention to, because the Democrat Party in Connecticut would be nowhere, I mean nowhere, without help from the unions. And so this unholy alliance has existed for many decades. We'll get you elected so long as you keep laws from being passed against us. If you give us more power, we'll give you more votes, and we'll get you more. And thus the circle goes round and round between the unions and the Democrats in Connecticut. So relationships existed for quite some time. But anyway, there was one other thing I wanted to grab because I saw my favorite animal. There he is. This is such a, here, look, I think this really tells the story. So Dan Haar writes, why Ned Lamont is attacking Josh Elliott and is oddly quiet about $15 billion in surpluses. The state of Connecticut has a $15 billion surplus. There's something wrong with that picture, Mr. Haar, only because in this critical moment, unless Mr. Lamont has drawn a different conclusion. Being able to tout a $15 billion surplus in the punky little state of Connecticut would do a lot for his reelection prospects. But he hasn't. So maybe there's something to this $15 billion surplus that requires closer scrutiny. Scrutiny we know we can never expect from you. So in any event, the other way to put this is the media in the state is not what you would call robust. They're kind of on automatic because there's no one who has really committed the resources to challenging them in a serious way. It's a difficult climb. It's a big ask. You need a lot of resources. But I will throw this one out here for my conservative colleagues in this wonderful state of Connecticut. We do not really have what I'll call our marketing chops together. Because if we had our marketing chops together, we would have the advertising revenue to support what we're doing. So instead, I hate to say it, we find ourselves scrambling to get monetized on Yahoo, or to find other ways in which we can pull money in, get donations, be a nonprofit. And sure, there are some major papers in Connecticut which happen to be nonprofit organizations, but we're not bringing the fight to them in any realistic manner. I'm just saying, and that's true across the board, not just in the media. So I'm going to shift now, and I want to talk about the Mideast. Yes, it continues to be something that blows hot and cold. And it blows hot and cold for the most obvious reason. In round terms, you have two groups who are vying for control. Okay? United States wants to be able to effect a regime change, even though we're not saying that. And I don't think I want to believe that America has learned from its mistakes here. And that in, quote, installing a new regime, it's going to reflect the will of the people. I think we did that with Iraq. Really, maybe some can disagree. And maybe the outcome didn't work out that well for us, at least in the short term. But I think in the long term, we're looking at a better situation. I choke on this only because, yes, there's still a lot of terrorism going on. Yes, there's some things that are about the Mideastern culture that are probably never going to change. The late Sam Faddis pointed this out, and I will say that, yeah, I kind of made the same observation. I'm going to have to agree. And that is, for whatever reason, okay, whether I think it's more Arab than Persian, but I think it's true for both, perhaps, that they have a tendency to hold grudges. And I'm talking 500-year grudges. This is worse than the Hatfields and the McCoys. This is the Hatfield and McCoys with attitude, a really bad attitude. And so the notion that you cannot trust your neighbor comes with the importance that you have honor in your family. And so that which defines honor is going to be determined by the kinds of behaviors that are expected of everybody in the family. And certainly, as anybody of us know who followed this, the biggest one is how the women conduct themselves. Okay, do they get a, what's the term I'm looking for? It'll come to me. All right, so you can have women who are sought out. They are attacked. They are assaulted. They are raped. Yet somehow it's their fault. And you can have honor killing. So the woman who is attacked and raped, it could be her own father that kills her in order to preserve the honor of the family. This kind of conduct, quite frankly, I'm going to say it, to me, it's inconceivable. But there you go. So what do I do with that? What I do with that is I say that this lack of trust, this tendency to hold a grudge, is something that, does anybody want to say anything about it? We have one in the car. Okay. Good. Family stuff. It informs politics. It tells you about the type of government that can be formed. It's going to tell you about, I'm going to say it's a resistance to change. You know what? This tendency to hold a grudge, the inability to form trust. I mean, that's stupid stuff, ladies and gentlemen. Just bear with me on this. Since when have you ever heard the Iraqi National Symphony? You won't, and you never will. And the reason is very simple. The type of cooperation that is required for a group of people with differing skill sets to work as a team in order to produce one thing together as a little group or community is not in the DNA of Mideastern culture. It just ain't. And all you have to do, when you start to think in these terms and then look for other examples, you're going to see, yes, there is this problem. The ability to work in large groups, quote, collectively towards a common goal, is virtually impossible for these people from what it looks like to me. I could be wrong. I could be wrong. I'm waiting for somebody to explain to me how I'm wrong. But the consequence is you get, I think it seems self-evident, you have a royal family in Saudi Arabia. They're the ones in charge. There are no opposing parties. And the people in Saudi Arabia are not interested in having an opposing party, nor in Iraq, nor in Iran. For them, the concept of some strong central authority seems to be sufficient, and they go about their business. Here in America, not so much. No, it's not good enough for a lot of reasons. If anybody knows our history. Even though you could look at these other countries and say that the preconditions for the kind of revolution that we want to see here, that we had here, exist there. But no, it's a non-starter because you have so many other things that have to be happening. And to me, the most important is you have to have the kind of intellectual ferment that creates the political institutions that drive change. And they don't have it. Sorry. Is it a Christian thing? It might be, you know. I mean, the way Quran talks, you have, it seems so strange that there's, as far as I can tell, there's no, well, let's try it this way. So if I'm going to start to do a comparison and contrast with how our religion compare to what happens in the Mideast, in other words, how Christianity and Islam are so different from each other. In fact, that one leads to one form of government and another leads to another. And I'll just point to the Catholic Church as an example. And we don't, and yes, even if you look at the smaller Orthodox churches, you know, you still, even with that, you're not going to find any corollary within Islam and these other countries. No, everything is broken down to a smaller level, and their ability to join together into a higher level of organization seems to be impossible. I guess the exception might be Iraq and how the Shias are organized. But the Shias are technically a minority, and they don't exactly get along with the Sunnis. So I would love to have a conversation with somebody who's a scholar and expert in this area. I mean, I'm an example of a person who's a little bit more than a casual reader. I try to grab and understand anything and come across anything that shows a different historical perspective. I want to make sure I have some sense of it. So, yeah. I still end up in the same place. I mean, I just look at them and I think about how different they are from each other. And I'm hard pressed to see anything that would look to, I mean, all right, I'll just take Iran as the point here. Okay, sure. Okay. You have had the IRGC, you've had the Ayatollahs. They have formed a fairly robust, centralized, tyrannical government. And yes, we've been chipping away at it, and it's slowly falling apart. It's just a matter of time. But even with that, you have an example here where you have a large enough set of people who know to work together as one entity. I don't know if Israel's a fair example in this case. I don't know. And Turkey would be another one. I need to spend more time on this. So, but at the bottom, but in the other thing here, let's face it, the other point, and I don't know how much the West has to take responsibility for this, maybe a lot. But you find that, again, I go back to the model that the first layer is all these clans and tribes, and they don't get along with each other. Trust is a problem. That's the first layer. Then you try to look at some form of governmental organization, the existence of political institutions, and I don't know. It's kind of weird. It's kind of a mess, and it's not like what I would expect to find in this country. All right, but we'll accept this for the moment. And then we try to get to the highest level, let's say the national level. And it's like, what are they riding on? Because if you go back to that first level, you have a long history of it's going to occur to me, waiting for it. I want to put this the right way. They have no sense of community beyond what's in front of them. They don't have any aspirations to some greater vision. They're just not going to do it. And where's it going to go? And the reason for this, again, I talk about these clans and tribes. So now let's talk about ethnic groups, the Kurds, the Azeris, okay, the Balakis in the southeast for Iran, Arabs as an ethnicity within Persia, Iran, all right? And then you have these other small subgroups, Zoroastrians. Now there's a specialty, just I mentioned it, Zoroastrianism is considered one of the original monotheistic religions, and we're going back thousands of years. We're going back theoretically before Judaism, all right? And so, in a sense, Zoroastrianism was sort of bypassed, if you will, by other religions, but they still exist. They're still there. They're sort of in the central northern part of Iran. Who knew? And I think there's some Zoroastrianism that extends into like Tajikistan, Turkmenistan, and that area. Okay, so the point is you have these groups. They haven't got along with each other. They put up with each other. And now you're going to layer over that some conventional notion of a political organization akin to what you see in other countries. I don't know. I mean, Turkey, I guess, in all fairness, you can say they have made it work. But here is my send-off as I stop on this topic and get ready for the next part. And that is, I'll put this. There is a loss of sensibility. Give me a minute here. I'm just trying to put these thoughts together. I don't know if it's a refusal, but there's a certain comfort, I guess, that comes with tradition. And these countries do not see any reason. I don't know. I need more specific examples. I'm going to let this go for now. And I want to move on. Anyway, I think the other point I want to make here is my send-off. Like it or not, President Trump is doing a lot of very interesting things. And here's the point I wanted to make. This is an important point, okay? I'm sure that President Trump has started to take, if he hasn't already, he's starting to see this. And others, when you go back, you don't have to go back that far, but when you go back to World War II and what Winston Churchill had to deal with, okay, it was not unlike, well, this is not the best example, but football. You run a play, you lose 10 yards. All right, we go back in the huddle, make another play. Well, this time we get the first down. But the other team is putting up a lot of resistance. All right, we'll try again. We make a few yards in this play. All right. But then we lose on the third down. And now we have to kick the ball. So we'll get the ball back. Now we have to come up with a new strategy, another way to deal with this. And this was what Winston Churchill and others were dealing with all the time, constantly having to change their strategy. And sometimes changing your strategy was nothing more than a new set of tactics. Well, let me give you a specific example. When the British and Americans were attacking Germans in North Africa, Patton had gotten into a bit of a pickle with Rommel's group. Now, funny thing here is that the Germans had really beat the Americans and the British pretty badly. And the Germans didn't have a very high opinion of the Americans in North Africa to begin with. So Rommel said, my work is done here, and he went home. Little did he know. Okay, so the Americans, Patton, looked at the situation and said, yep, I guess the Germans beat us pretty good that time, but we're going to come up with another plan. So here's the thing. Let me just recite for you. A rule is that you, if you have two armies, you can go at each other head to head. However, if one has an army and all the other has is a division, all you can do is a flanking action. Okay, division can go head on with a larger force, so you have to do something on a weak side. If you're a guerrilla force and you're dealing with the army, all you can do is little pot shots here and there because that's all you have in terms of resources to work with. Okay, in Patton's case, with respect to Rommel's panzer divisions, he had enough for a flanking action, and that's exactly what they did. So the Germans had become overconfident. They were working their way through this valley there in North Africa, but Patton had set up troops and equipment on both sides of this valley that would be coming through. Now, how the Germans would not think that we were going to do that, it beats me, but that's what we did. And it was a flanking action that destroyed a huge amount of German equipment and caused them to retreat. Okay, this was a case of a smaller force outdoing a larger force through the careful and smart use of tactics, position, location. Okay, and so I'm just using that as an example of where we're struggling with getting the Strait of Hormuz open, and we're trying different tactics, different approaches until finally we'll get the strait open. But just like in World War II, where there's all this back and forth and we're trying to figure out an effective method, okay, I'm surprised to say this. I mean, just like my friend Jason, when we're arguing with each other, how can you argue that America, the greatest military power in the world, is being bamboozled by a bunch of towelheads in Iran? Well, if I may, that's the wrong attitude, okay? But that's the attitude a lot of Americans have, and nonetheless. So, yes, we'll state one obvious point, and that is that there is probably a doctrine. You know what? Let me go back. It was claimed based upon something I had read. Again, the IRGC, the Iranian government, knew for decades that America was going to eventually show up. What they also knew was that if America showed up in force, There is no way that the Iranian military could win. They knew they would be defeated by America. Okay? Well, to me, I don't think we're acting like that myself, but that's just me. So they developed a doctrine. It's what I would call a doctrine of denial. Okay, so the doctrine of denial works simply by spreading your forces out as much as possible, spreading your resources out as much as possible, all right, so that basically the enemy has to fight for every inch of territory. Make it as costly as possible. And believe me, the Iranians are just as capable as we are at being deceitful, at playing tricks, at diverting us, trying finding ways to divide us. They're just as good at it. Plus, I have to remind you, once again, I apologize, Iran has the home field advantage. And that when it comes to war, the home field advantage is big. All right. So, I had mentioned this before. I'll mention it again. There was cases where we have surveillance showing these openings into caves, into mountains in different places, and there's a lot of them. It's like I said, the doctrine was to disperse your resources and forces as much as possible. And you disperse them so much, some of them are fake. They're not real cave entrances, okay? You want the Americans to think they're cave entrances and waste their ammunition on them. This is similar, not just like, but it's similar to what the Russians did in World War II. Little known fact. The Russians made the Germans waste ammunition on fake military positions. There's the concept, if you may remember, of the Potemkin village. Well, I'd say the Russians, the Soviets did that to it fairly well. So they would create these, they would make structures of just empty structures of what looked like buildings and make a lot of them, make it look like a village, make it look like it might have some military in it. And that was good enough for the Germans to bomb it. Only there's nothing there to bomb. Okay? And don't think for a minute that the Iranians haven't tried things like that. This is a game that's been played over and over again by both sides in the Ukraine-Russian conflict. It's a standard military tactic. Okay, only in this case, it's being carried out in Iran in the context of their mountainous regions. So you have a built-in capacity for deceiving the enemy when you have all these valleys and bluffs and cliffs and and other parts of a mountain that would be like, hey, the drone is looking to say, whoa, we got to get in there and get a closer look at that and find something. You're going, well, I don't know, this could be a place where they store some munitions and stuff. Well, maybe we should bomb it. Not so fast. No, you're going to study this a little bit more, and you're going to determine whether or not there's any kind of activity. Stupid stuff, okay? You look for tracks in the dirt leading up to the entrance. How much of it? Are there a lot of tracks, a few tracks? Does it look like there's much of anything happening? They would probably try to take thermal readings, radiation readings, any other sensors that can give them any other data. Okay, but let me say it. If the Iranians have made, remember, over 40 years, hundreds, okay, hundreds of these fake entrances. Do you think that's going to keep us a little busy? You betcha, okay? So we have the challenge, okay, of developing methods where we can separate out the fake ones from the real ones. And I don't know. I'm trying to put myself in the position of an Iranian general who would be in charge of tricking the Americans. And I'd find this is the funny thing, right? Much like and the point's been made time and again. Great. They fire a $100,000 drone at us, but we have to bring it down with a $2 million missile. That kind of arithmetic can only work for so long, okay? And by the same token, how much of our munitions can be wasted on fake targets? So let's just say that there are, I mean, this would be a funny way to put it, but let's just say real targets, okay, require lots of munitions to really destroy, okay. Fake ones, well, maybe they don't require so much, but you don't know that they're fake. So now we go into the middle ground. Here's the middle ground. So I, as the Iranian general, sitting there go, no, we've got some data here on how the Americans like to bomb our caves. And I think we have some intelligence here, thanks to the Russians and Chinese. They're really good friends of ours. About, well, how these drones, these American drones, surveil things. Okay, you got these ones that can loiter for a long period of time. There might be drive-bys. There might be things that are even higher level. Who knows? And, well, gee, we have a sense of when they'll show up, how long they'll stick around, and maybe with the Russian Chinese help, we can get a little idea of how they want to collect the information. So, us Iranians, we can be very friendly, accommodating type. So let's help them out in terms of thinking about some of these caves. So we'll create some certain level of false activity around a false tunnel, false cave. So how much is enough? How much is enough for the Americans to go, going to have to pay attention to that. We can't discount this. All right. And so I would say, just trying to decide. It's easy to make fake tunnels. Easy. Okay. So what if the Iranians, here's my thought, what if the Iranians actually made more fake tunnels than real tunnels? Wait, hey, if you ever looked at a map of the Zagros Mountains, dude, there are games to be played. Oh my goodness. Okay, so what do you do with this? Okay, I'm willing to bet there's another little thing. So the Iranian general has a question. The Iranian general say, well, what happens if we create a dust up over an area? Let's say we have a sudden burst of activity, but we do it around a fake tunnel. All right, so what will the Americans do? Are we going to see more of the drones? Is there something else? Will the Russians and Chinese tell us anything about how they might be repositioning their satellites? What can we learn from this? Okay. Now, I want to throw one more in. Okay, as part of this hypothetical picture here. Some targets, all right, let me give you an obvious one. So the Iranian general says, we still have some of these ballistic missile launchers. We actually got a pretty good supply of them. But let's just find out how the Americans really react. So they have a cave. It could be a fake cave. It could be a fake cave. So they haul one of their ballistic missiles to one of their fake caves and fire it from there. Okay. Now the Americans decide, oh yeah, we're going to go after them. And so they destroy that fake cave. And there could be ways in which the Iranians could camouflage the launcher and make it seem like it's inside the cave when it's not. A lot of tricks here to consider, ladies and gentlemen, because if you take the time and put yourself in the same position as my fictional Iranian general, and I don't know, call him Al Saeed Saber Dua, and start to, because you would have a lot of information to work with. You bring that in, okay, put it on a map. You have some guys that, look, the Iranians are smarter than you think. I'm just going to say. And they'll put together these databases, and they'll put together an analysis, and they'll have a sense of how the Americans are playing it here. And so they'll develop their own counter strategy. Well, meantime, back at the Pentagon, they know that the Iranian generals are trying to think like this. All right, so now it's incumbent upon us as Americans to still try and differentiate the fake tunnels from the real ones. But I'm going to say it, especially since we had this news announcement came out that these THAAD receptors, they claim now we've used up 80% of them. Okay, well, that's not the only weapon that we have in our arsenal. There are others to consider, and there are other things that we could do in a pinch. We can innovate too. But with all of that considered, I'm just trying to get a sense of this. Look, I have to go back to another earlier point, and this is a basic truism, but it's the same. But I say this with caution because it's the same basic truism that was offered with respect to the battle between Russia and Ukraine. The truism is this: the country that has a bigger economy, the country that has a bigger GDP, is the one that's going to win, generally speaking. All right, but I think we're learning that there are some other factors to consider. And since I brought up Russia, Ukraine, I just want to mention before I came on here, I watched this really amazing video. Did you know that there are, in fact, still American mercenaries working with the Ukrainians? So here's a video, shows American mercenaries, you can hear them talking English, and the Ukrainians, you can hear them talking Ukrainian. And you had just what a hellscape. Oh my God. So they're going through this forest, this stand of woods, and they found this Russian trench that had been built. But oh my God, what a garbage dump. Jesus. In any event, they had found some Russians, quote, holed up in this trench. And for the next 30 minutes, it was gunfire. It was shouting at them to surrender. It was throwing all kinds of grenades, regular hand grenades. Now, I don't know if you've been hearing about these thermobaric grenades that are being used. They don't, the thermobaric ones don't make a lot of noise, but apparently, as the name implies, there is both a lot of heat and a lot of pressure released quickly. And so it's not quite like an explosion, but it can be as damaging. And especially because they have these small, narrow tunnels. You throw one of these thermobaric grenades in there, that's got to mess people up. Okay? In any event, so the video shows them eventually getting these Russians to come out and surrender. They're shouting at them in Russian for them to take their jackets off because they don't know if they've got bombs or explosives or handgun or whatever. But they didn't, as it turns out. And it's just, I cannot imagine being in a situation like that. Maybe if I steeled myself for it, but man, oh man, we're talking rough business here. Jeez. So yeah, maybe I should put up a link for it live. Is that it? Or yeah, here it is. I don't know. I gotta see. Okay, the channel is Brothers in Arms Global. It's Brother in Arms Global. You should definitely go check it out. And I don't know, this, and the other thing is that it underscores the fact that the Russians have a presence in terms of fielding drones as well. These guys had to be on a constant lookout for Russian drones coming to attack them. And sometimes you had friendly drones, and you couldn't really tell the difference. So it's pretty crazy, So I'll just state the obvious, by the way. If we do have boots on the ground in Iran, expect stuff like this and worse, especially if we're fighting in the mountains. Second only to door-to-door urban fighting is fighting in the mountains, which is worse. And now if you have the Iranians putting a lot of effort into what we'll call decoys, in other ways to fool us, it's just, and the problem is you don't know, right? You've come up on this tunnel. So the Iranians would have created the impression that there was a lot of activity around there. So now the Americans have to be extra cautious as they approach this tunnel. And the problem is, if you want to clear it out, you're going to have to go in there. Not a savory prospect by any stretch of the imagination, but go in there they would, and throw in grenades of various kinds, shoot some shots. So resources and forces would be wasted on a non-target. And so how much of that do you keep doing? Great, you've cleared it out. And now that what are you going to do? Seal it off, or are you going to have a small force station there so they can't come back? What are you going to do? We have, if we were to do something like that, there's sort of an expectation that you're going to hold the ground. But in those circumstances, I don't know. I think you would need better intelligence about what the other forces are doing if you're going to make any kind of attempt at, holding ground and then expanding like that. Anyway, so there's that party, and then the party refused. All right, I'm just going to talk about the Democrat Socialist Party of America, which we now know, for all intents and purposes, is Communist Party, CP, Communist Party USA, okay? And they have this thin little crappy mask on their face called DSA. And you've already, Bill Maher had a great little clip where he was pulling up these examples now where members of the so-called DSA are being quite upfront about pushing for communism. And I don't know. I can tell you that my fellow conservatives have spent a lot of time, okay, looking at liberals, progressives, Democrats. And now we have DSA types. I'm sure I'm leaving somebody out here. But the problem is always the same. They have these labels, and we know that all these labels are, quote, left-leaning. How much left? All right. So to us, left means centralized state authority. The more left you are, the more centralized you want the government to be. So again, there's a notion that there's a point past which you've gone too far left. There's too much centralized authority. Now, in my opinion, and opinion of many others, especially with respect to Connecticut, and you can throw in the other deep blue states like California and Illinois, that these are examples where, what's the term I'm looking for? Their leftist programs have gone too far left, and the states are overregulated. Yes, overregulated. So now the problem, ladies and gentlemen, is where do you start to say, okay, we're going to unwind this, we're going to repeal this, we're not going to enforce this, we're going to downplay it, we're going to have countervailing legislation. To me, is crazy, but okay. And it's a mess. But I'm still in the camp that says we've got to deal with this. There are things that have to be done. Anyway, I have come upon my hour as it is, and I'd say shucks, none of my friends wanted to talk to me tonight. I'm feeling hurt. Wherever you boys went, I'm going to have a little chat with you. So in the meantime, and just to mention, this last 2 nights have been nuts. All right, but tomorrow night, I'm hoping to get the other guys on. That'll be a Friday night. People should be freed up a little bit more. And we will make it interesting. So thanks for listening, guys. And it's called Fight On.